Far out in the cold and golden dark beyond the asteroids and the orbit of distant red Mars, a great pale world turns on its side, wrapped in bands of butterscotch and cream, and at the very top of it, crowning the North Pole like a seal pressed into wax, there floats a shape that should not be there at all. 6 straight edges, 6 clean corners, a hexagon, enormous and serene, drawn in cloud across the roof of a planet. It is wider than the Earth, and it has held its shape for longer than anyone has been watching. Spinning in the amber haze where a star so vast it makes our sun look ordinary, shines down on rings of ice. Picture a snowflake's geometry, scaled up until a whole world could nest inside one of its sides and set turning slowly in the deep. That is where the night will rest tonight, on the cloud-laid corners of Saturn's hexagon. There is nothing here for you to memorize, nothing to carry into tomorrow. The facts that drift past you now ask for none of your effort. Let them arrive the way that faint gold light arrives at the rim of a telescope, having crossed more than 1 billion kilometers of empty space to get here, asking nothing in return. Some will settle somewhere beneath your thoughts and stay. Most will simply pass on through, the way light slips across a sleeping room and wakes no one and is lovely all the same. You do not need to understand a single thing. Let your breath lengthen, let the shoulders come down from where the day has held them. You're only here to rest beneath a 6-sided shape made of weather and to let its long, slow turning carry you down towards sleep. So begin at the edges, where the wonder first announces itself with those 6 impossible lines of cloud. A hexagon is a shape of corners and angles, the geometry of honeycomb and bathroom tile, the shape you might draw with a ruler and a steady hand. It is the last thing you would expect to find painted across the top of a ball of swirling gas, where everything is supposed to curl and smear and blur. Yet there it is, ringing the North Pole of Saturn, 6 nearly straight walls of cloud meeting at 6 soft corners, a geometric figure traced in vapour on a world with no solid ground to hold a line straight. Nothing built it, no coastline shaped it, no mountain range, no hand. It simply emerged, the way frost ferns spread across a winter pane without anyone arranging them, order rising on its own out of moving air. To look at it is to feel the small, clean shock of finding a perfect shape in a place that has no reason to keep one. The scale of it is the part the mind keeps slipping on. This 6-sided pattern stretches roughly 30,000 kilometers from one flat side across to the other, far enough that the entire Earth could be set down inside it, with broad margins of cloud to spare on every side. Each single edge of the hexagon runs about 13,800 kilometers long, which is to say that any one of those 6 straight walls is wider than our whole planet from pole to pole. Try gently to hold that. Not the hexagon, but one of its sides, one line of cloud, already larger than the world beneath your bed. The thing is so vast that if you were somehow set down upon it, you would have no way of knowing you stood on a geometric figure at all. You would see only an endless plain of pale cloud running off in every direction, the great shape far too large for any single glance to gather. To walk the perimeter of the hexagon would be the journey of a lifetime, and then many lifetimes more. The whole 6-sided loop runs to something near 90,000 kilometers around, more than twice the distance around the Earth's equator. Set out on foot along one of its cloud edges, covering good ground each day, and you would not complete the circuit in years, nor in decades. Whole generations would pass before a single walker closed the loop. The shape is so enormous that to trace it by any pace a body could keep would outlast the body entirely, the wall of cloud running on far beyond the reach of any single life. The planet that holds it lies so far off that even light, the swiftest thing there is, takes well over an hour to bridge the gap. When the spacecraft at Saturn sent its images home, its messages crossed that distance at light's own speed and still arrived more than an hour after they were sent, so that those who waited on Earth always watched a Saturn already more than an hour into its past. To send an instruction the other way took just as long, every command a patient hour or more in the crossing. The hexagon you picture turns at the far end of a gulf so wide that even light grows old upon the way, the planet forever seen a little behind the moment it is in. Holding all that distance and all that size together, the mind does best to simply let go of grasping them. The hexagon is wider than a world. The planet sits more than 1 billion kilometers off. The numbers run past anything the imagination can truly seize. And there is no need to seize them. It is enough to know that something so enormous, so far away, turns quietly on without any help, the way one might rest beside a great dark ocean without needing to measure it, soothed rather than troubled by a bigness past all holding. Those edges are not painted lines, but moving rivers of air, and that is the first secret of how the shape survives. Running along the perimeter of the hexagon is a jet stream, a narrow band of wind streaming around the pole at a furious pace, something close to 320 kilometers each hour, faster than the strongest gusts our own fiercest storms have ever managed. The clouds we see as a clean six-sided wall are really this swift river of air, marking its own path across the sky. And yet from far enough away, all that speed reads as stillness, a calm, bright outline hung above the pole, the way a spinning wheel can look motionless when it turns fast enough. The fury is real. The serenity is also real. Both are true at once, and there is a strange ease in holding them together. The corners are where the geometry feels most deliberate, and they are the detail that first made people doubt their own eyes. 6 times around that great loop, the jet stream bends sharply, turning a corner as crisply as a road squaring off at the edge of a field before running straight again along the next wall. Between the corners, the cloud edge holds remarkably true, barely bowing as though ruled. A flowing thing, with nothing to push against and nothing to follow, choosing again and again to turn at 6 even points and travel in 6 even lines. When the first clear images came back and showed those angles, more than one careful person assumed a flaw in the camera, a trick of a light, some error in the machine. It took a long while to accept that the sky itself had simply drawn a hexagon, and meant it. What deepens the mystery is how perfectly the figure sits centred on the pole, neither sliding off toward one side nor wandering loose across the cloud tops. The hexagon's middle rests almost exactly over Saturn's true north, the spin point of the entire planet, as though the world were balancing a 6-pointed crown precisely on the crown of its head. Year after year it stays there, fixed over the pole while the rest of the atmosphere churns and streams around it. There is a deep steadiness in that placement, a sense of something held in quiet equilibrium far from any hand that could be steadying it. The whole great planet turns beneath it, and the shape keeps its seat, patient at the very axis of all that motion. The persistence of the thing across time is perhaps its most astonishing feature of all. This is not a pattern that bloomed for a season and then unravelled. The hexagon has kept its 6-sided form for at least 40 years, every corner still in place across 4 decades of watching, and very likely it has held that shape for far longer than anyone has had the means to see it. Storms on Earth live for days, a week at most, before they spend themselves and fade. This shape has outlasted every hurricane in human record many thousands of times over, standing at the pole through Saturnian winters and summers alike, unbroken and unhurried. To know that it was already turning just so before the first image of it was ever made is to feel how much the universe does quietly, with no audience, simply because that is how the air there moves. The discovery of it came from 2 small travellers sent out across the dark in the late 1970s. As the Voyager spacecraft swept past Saturn in 1980 and 1981, their cameras caught for the first time that strange angular outline ringing the northern pole. No one had predicted it. No one had imagined that a planet might wear a hexagon. The images returned across the enormous distance, grainy and faint, and the shape within them was so unexpected that it sat half-believed for years, a curiosity tucked in the data, waiting. The 2 probes flew on, outward toward the edge of the solar system and beyond, carrying their golden records into interstellar night, while behind them, at Saturn, the shape they had glimpsed went on turning, keeping it secret until better eyes could return. When those better eyes finally came, the hexagon resolved into something even cleaner and stranger than the first blurred glimpses had suggested. Sharper cameras revealed the edges to be straighter, the corners more defined, the whole figure more deliberate than anyone had dared assume from the early frames. What might have been dismissed as a smear or a coincidence of viewing angle stood confirmed as a true and lasting feature of the planet, a genuine six-sided river of wind circling the pole. The shape was not in the lens, it was not in the imagination. It was simply, soberly there, exactly as geometric as it appeared, a fact of Saturn as solid as its rings. And the more closely it was studied, the more questions it opened, each answer unfolding into deeper wonder about how moving air could ever learn to keep so precise a form. A useful way to feel the proportions is to set our own world against a single one of those six walls. Lay the Earth, pole to pole, along one edge of the hexagon, and the planet falls short, the edge running on past the curve of the globe with room left over. Stack 3 or 4 Earths in a row, and only then do you span one side. The whole figure, all 6 sides together, encloses an area into which our world could be dropped like a coin into a wide bowl, with the bright cloud rim circling far beyond it on every hand. It is a shape measured in planets, its smallest straight segment already larger than the ground that holds every city and ocean you have ever known. For all that vastness, the regularity holds. The 6 sides do not vary wildly in length, nor do the corners gather to one side and thin out on the other. They are spaced around the pole with a steadiness that the eye reads at once as deliberate, each wall a near twin of the others, each angle close to its neighbours. In a churning atmosphere, where one might expect only smears and accidents, this evenness is the quiet astonishment. The figure is not a rough approximation of a hexagon, but a clean and faithful one, drawn again and again by the wind to nearly the same measure, year upon year. There is even a pleasing exactness to its angles, the kind a geometer would recognise. A perfect hexagon turns through 120 degrees at every corner, 6 equal bends closing a smooth circuit, and the jet stream's path comes strikingly near to that ideal. The wind swings through close to that same angle 6 times around the pole, as though some invisible draftsman were guiding it, though nothing guides it but the balance of its own motion. To find textbook geometry traced in cloud across a planet is to feel the deep kinship between the abstract shapes of mathematics and the living behaviour of the physical world, the figure on the page and the figure in the sky, obeying one quiet logic. The 2 small craft that first found the shape have since travelled farther than anything else ever built by human hands. Long after their brief passage by Saturn, they sailed on outward, past the orbits of the outer planets, past the edge where the sun's wind gives way to the space between the stars, until they crossed at last into interstellar space itself. They carry still their golden records, plates of sounds and images from Earth meant for whatever might one day find them, drifting now through the dark beyond the solar system. The same probes that glimpsed the hexagon are voyaging yet, farther every year, while the shape they discovered keeps turning quietly back at the planet they left so long ago. The persistence of the hexagon is proven in the simplest, most patient way, by the long gap between the glimpses. The Voyager saw it at the start of the 1980s. Cassini saw it still in place across the years that followed, into the second decade of the new century. Between those 2 visits stretched more than 3.5 decades in which no craft was near, and yet when the second visitor arrived, the shape was there, unmistakably the same, 6 sides still squared around the pole. That long interval, bridged by 2 separate missions a generation apart, is the firmest evidence of the shape's endurance, a before and an after taken 30-odd years apart, showing the hexagon unchanged across the whole span between. To have kept its form across that gap, through everything those decades held, is the quiet measure of its stability. Whole human lives unfolded between the first sight of the hexagon and the second. Children born when the Voyagers flew by were grown by the time Cassini confirmed the shape still held. And through all of it, indifferent to every event on the small blue world that watched it, the hexagon simply went on, its corners in their places, its jet stream lapping its six-sided course, untroubled, changing not at all. There are few things anywhere so steadfast, a pattern that outlasts the watchers who study it, holding its shape while generations come and go. Begin, then, with what holds the whole shape together, the swift wind that draws every line of it. That perimeter jet streaming around the hexagon does not merely trace the figure, it is the figure, the living current whose path the clouds reveal. Air at those latitudes flows around the pole in a tight, fast band, and where that band runs, the cloud tops mark it for the eye, the way smoke makes a draught visible in a still room. The wind itself is the artist and the art at once. To understand the hexagon at all is to understand this single river of air, looping the pole at hundreds of kilometers an hour, and somehow choosing, mile after mile, to flow in straight lines and sharp turns rather than the smooth circle that everything in nature seems to prefer. That choice of straight lines over a circle is the heart of the puzzle, and the answer turns out to live in the deep behaviour of flowing things. A fast, narrow stream of air or water set running in a loop does not always stay a smooth ring. Under the right conditions, it begins to wobble, to develop a regular series of bends, a meander that repeats itself evenly around the circuit. When the number of those bends settles at exactly 6, a hexagon appears. Its corners the points where the meandering jet swings widest, its edges the straight runs between. The shape is not painted onto the planet from outside. It rises from within the flow itself, an inevitable rhythm hidden inside fast-moving fluid, waiting only for the right speed and the right loop to draw it out into the open. This kind of self-made wave in a turning fluid has a name, and it carries some of the planet's own grandeur. Scientists call it a Rossby wave, after the meteorologist who first described how great rivers of air on a rotating world will bend and ripple in long regular waves. On Earth, these same waves shape the wandering path of our high-altitude jet streams, sending them dipping south and swinging north in slow curves that steer our weather from below. On Saturn, one such wave has locked itself into a closed, six-cornered loop around the pole and simply stayed there, turning with the planet. The hexagon, for all its strangeness, is built from the same physics that decides whether next week brings clear skies or rain to a town on our own small world. The cosmos repeats its favourite tricks at every scale. A river offers the nearest everyday picture of how a fast flow learns to wander. Watch a swift stream cross a wide flat valley, and it rarely runs straight. Instead, it swings from bank to bank in long, regular loops, a meander that repeats with a rhythm all its own. The water, given room and speed, bends into curves rather than holding a line. The polar jet of Saturn does the same, save that its valley is a circle around the pole, so its meander, instead of trailing off downstream, must close upon itself and join its own beginning. When the loops fit the circle in 6 even swings, the river of air becomes a hexagon, a meandering stream caught endlessly chasing its own tail. What keeps that wave from simply smearing away is a delicate balance, the kind that holds a single clear note ringing rather than letting it dissolve into noise. On either side of the fast jet, the air turns at different speeds, and that contrast feeds the wave, pumping just enough energy into its bends to replace what slowly leaks away. The hexagon is not a still object, but a living equilibrium, a shape continually rebuilt by the flow even as the flow tends to erase it, the making and the unmaking so finely matched that the figure appears, to any glance, to simply stand. It is held the way a fountain holds its shape, always falling, always renewed. The wave also has a depth to its waters that makes the analogy run deeper still. A meander in a shallow creek is one thing. This is a meander in an ocean of gas thousands of kilometers deep, its bends reaching far down below the visible clouds. The hexagon we see is the surface expression of a disturbance with great vertical reach, less like a ripple on a pond than like a slow, standing swell that runs from the surface down into the dark. To picture it truly is to picture not a line drawn on a sphere, but a tall, six-sided curtain of moving air, hanging from the cloud tops down into depths no eye will ever follow. The whole figure does turn, though so slowly and so steadily that it seems carved in place. The hexagon rotates around the pole at very nearly the same rate as the planet's own deep interior, completing a turn in something close to Saturn's true day, which runs a little under 11 hours. So the shape is not frozen. It wheels with the world, a vast six-sided pinwheel keeping time with the spinning of the planet beneath it. That near-perfect match between the hexagon's rotation and the rotation of Saturn's hidden depths is itself a clue, hinting that the shape is anchored to something far below the visible clouds, rooted in the planet's interior rather than drifting free on the wind. The pattern and the planet turn almost as one, locked together across the gulf of cloud between them. Because it keeps such faithful time with the deep planet, the hexagon barely creeps in its position from one year to the next. The shape does not wander loose around the pole, sliding ahead or falling behind. It holds its longitude with remarkable constancy, its corners returning to nearly the same places turn after turn. This steadiness sets it apart from most weather, which shifts and migrates and never sits still, and it is one more sign that the hexagon is bound to something deep and firm within the planet rather than riding free on the shallow surface winds. The shape stays where it is, year upon year, a fixed mark on a turning world. The jet stream that traces the figure is, by every measure, among the steadiest great winds anywhere known to science. Storms come and go, hazes thicken and thin, the very colour of the pole ripens from blue to gold, and through all of it the perimeter jet holds its course, lapping the same six-sided track at nearly the same furious pace decade after decade. Few currents of air on any world keep so constant a speed and so constant a path for so long. The hexagon's wind is a model of constancy, a great river of air that has found its channel and refuses to leave it, running true while everything around it changes. For a long time, that deep rate of spin was one of the hardest things to learn about Saturn at all, and the hexagon offered a quiet hand in finding it. A ball of gas has no fixed landmarks, no continents to track, so measuring exactly how fast the true body of the planet turns is a genuine difficulty. Different cloud bands drift at different speeds, smearing the answer. But the hexagon, anchored as it is near the pole and tied to the deeper rotation, gives observers a rare steady mark, a feature that keeps better time than the restless equatorial clouds. In trying to read the planet's true heartbeat, its real rate of turning beneath all that shifting weather, scientists have looked to this six-sided shape as one of the steadiest clocks the cloudy world provides. One of the strangest facts about the hexagon is what is missing from the opposite end of the planet. Saturn has two poles, north and south, and yet only the north wears a hexagon. Swing your attention to the southern pole, and the geometry simply vanishes. There the polar winds curl into a more ordinary form, a great rotating storm without the straight edges or the sharp corners, a swirl rather than a shape. Why the north should crystallize into six clean sides while the south stays round is not fully understood, and the asymmetry is part of what makes the hexagon feel almost chosen, as though the planet expresses itself differently at its two ends. One pole keeps a circle, the other keeps a hexagon. Both turn quietly in the dark, and only one of them has learned the trick of corners. At the very centre of the hexagon, sitting over the pole itself, spins a single enormous storm, a vast whirlpool of cloud wound tight around the axis. This central vortex is the still, turning heart of the whole arrangement, a hurricane-like spiral fixed exactly upon the planet's northern axis. Unlike a storm on Earth, which wanders across the sea and weakens when it meets land, this one has nowhere to go. It sits locked at the pole, perpetually spinning, ringed by its six-sided wall of jet stream wind. Around it, the hexagon. Within it, the eye. The geometry outside and the spiral inside belong to the same great system, two parts of a single pattern that the polar air has settled into and kept. The eye of that polar storm is so large it strains comparison with anything in our own skies. Where the eye of a powerful hurricane on Earth might span a few dozen kilometres, the eye of Saturn's polar vortex stretches across a region perhaps 50 times wider, a clear central well thousands of kilometres across, ringed by towering walls of cloud. If our most enormous storm were set beside it, ours would be a coin laid next to a dinner plate. To picture standing at the calm middle of that eye, looking outward, is to imagine cloud walls climbing the horizon in every direction, a circular rampart of vapour so distant and so high that its far side would curve away below the edge of sight, the whole thing turning in profound silence at the top of a golden world. Those cloud walls do not merely spread, they rise, climbing high above the surrounding haze, the clouds ringing the central eye tower upward many kilometres, their tops catching what little sunlight reaches the pole, so that the storm has a real and sculpted depth to it, a three-dimensional architecture of vapour rather than a flat-painted swirl. Sunlight striking those high walls casts long shadows down across the lower cloud decks below, and from those shadows the true height of the storm can be measured, just as the length of a shadow on a sundial tells the hour. The polar storm is not a stain on the cloud tops, but a structure with walls and floors and great vertical reach, a cathedral of cloud raised over the pole measured by its own shadow. The hexagon and the storm at its centre are two different kinds of motion, and the difference is worth resting on. The central vortex spins, a true rotation, its clouds wheeling around the pole like water circling a drain. The hexagon, by contrast, does not so much spin as stand. It is a wave, a fixed pattern through which the wind flows, more like the shape of a flag rippling in a steady breeze than like the flag itself travelling anywhere. One is a turning thing, the other a standing thing, and they share the same pole between them, the spinning eye nested within the standing six-sided wall, motion of two distinct natures held in a single quiet arrangement. Between the fast jet and the slower air it borders, the contrast in speed is enormous, a steep cliff of wind sometimes called sheer. On one side of that narrow stream the clouds nearly keep pace with it. A little way off, they lag far behind, so that across a short span of latitude the wind changes from a near gale to something far calmer. It is this sharp step in speed that gives the jet its edge and feeds the wave its energy, the whole hexagon balanced upon a thin line where slow air meets swift. Stand a feather on the slow side and it would barely stir. Carry it a short way toward the jet and it would be torn from your hand. The clouds of the eye wall, ringing that central calm, move at a tremendous clip of their own, racing around the small clear centre far faster than any storm wall on Earth. To circle so vast an eye, the winds must travel an enormous distance with every turn, and they do so at speeds that would flatten any structure our world has ever raised. Yet because the whole system is so immense and so far away, even that ferocity unfolds in apparent slow motion to any distant watcher, the eye wall sweeping its great circle with the unhurried majesty of an hour hand, its true violence hidden inside its sheer scale. The jet stream that draws the hexagon behaves much like a weatherfront on Earth, a boundary between two great masses of air. On one side lies the cold cap penned at the pole, on the other the warmer, differently moving air of the lower latitudes, and along the seam where they meet, the wind races fastest, just as our own jet streams run along the borders between warm and cold. The hexagon is, in this sense, a frontier drawn in cloud, the meeting line of two air masses bent into geometry, the place where one realm of the planet's sky gives way to another, marked out in a swift bright wall. A standing wave is a thing easier to feel than to define, and the hexagon is the grandest one in the solar system. Trail a stick in a flowing stream, and a ripple forms just behind it, a shape that holds perfectly still while the water rushes through it without pause. The wave stays, the water passes. So it is with the hexagon. The shape stands fixed at the pole, while the air streams endlessly through it, the figure unmoving even as nothing within it is ever still. To grasp that is to hold a small paradox gently in the mind, a permanent shape made entirely of passing wind, a stillness woven out of pure motion. The very centre of the great storm, glimpsed from above, glows a different colour from the gold around it, a darker, redder eye. Where the haze thins over the deep, warm well at the pole, the clouds take on a deeper hue, so that the eye of the polar vortex looks dusky and ruddy against the pale gold of the surrounding cloud, a darker pupil at the heart of the bright shape. To look down upon it is to see a great six-sided figure of soft amber framing a deeper, warmer centre, colour within colour, the calm eye marked out in a richer shade at the very pivot of all that turning. Then there is the colour, which is not fixed but changes with the long Saturnian seasons. When the hexagon was first studied in detail, the air inside it carried a cool bluish cast, a dim slate tone like deep water under cloud. But as the years passed and the northern pole turned slowly from the long dark of its winter toward the light of its spring and summer, the whole interior of the hexagon shifted, warming through grey and green toward a rich hazy gold. The shape did not change. Its colour did, ripening like fruit across the seasons, blue giving way to amber as the sunlight returned. To watch that slow change unfold over years is to see a planet keeping a calendar in colour, the hexagon's hue marking the turning of a year that lasts longer than a human life. The cause of that colour shift lies in sunlight itself, working slowly on the air. Through the long polar winter, with the North Pole tilted away from the sun and held in shadow, the atmosphere inside the hexagon stayed clear and cool and blue. But as sunlight returned with the changing season, it began to brew a fine golden haze high in the air, the same kind of photochemical smog that sunlight stirs in any thick atmosphere, tinting the clear blue toward honey and amber. The returning light did not merely brighten the pole, it transformed its very colour, cooking a soft golden veil out of the once clear sky. The hexagon became a kind of sundial of hue, its changing colour a faithful record of how much light had returned to the pole. The blue of the polar winter and the gold of the polar summer come from two different ways that air can colour light. In the clear, haze-free winter air, sunlight scattered among the gas molecules themselves, favouring blue, much as the very same scattering paints the daytime sky of Earth a familiar blue. When summer brought the haze, that fine golden smog took over, absorbing and reddening the light until amber won out over blue. So the hexagon's two colours are the two colours of any sky, the clean blue of bare air and the warm gold of air thick with haze, the pole wearing first one and then the other as the seasons turned. Saturn keeps its gentle gold rather than the deep blue of the farthest giant planets, and the difference lies in a trace of gas. The two outermost giants glow a rich blue because their air holds a little methane, which drinks in red light and leaves the blue to shine. Saturn's upper air holds less of that gas and more of the golden haze, so its face stays creamy and warm rather than cool and blue. A small difference in the recipe of the air decides whether a giant planet shows the colour of honey or the colour of deep water, and Saturn, with its particular blend, settled long ago on gold. That same golden haze is forever being made anew, brewed fresh by sunlight high in the air. When the faint far sunlight strikes the gases of the upper atmosphere, it breaks and rearranges them into the fine particles of haze, a slow chemistry running wherever the light reaches, continually replenishing the veil that softens the planet's face. The gold of Saturn is not a fixed coat of paint, but a living product of light and air, made and remade in the heights, thickening where the sun shines longest. The hexagon's summer gold is sunlight itself, caught and transformed into colour in the cold air above the pole. This whole great machine, the hexagon and its jet stream and its central storm, was studied most closely not by a passing glance, but by a visitor that stayed. A spacecraft named Cassini reached Saturn in the summer of 2004 and settled into orbit, circling the planet for 13 years, long enough to watch a season turn. Where the Voyagers had only flown past and glimpsed the Hexagon in passing, Cassini lingered, looping the planet again and again, returning to the pole through years of changing light. It is one thing to catch a shape in a single photograph as you rush by. It is another to watch it patiently across more than a decade, season into season, until its slow rhythms reveal themselves. Nearly everything we know about the Hexagon's depth and colour and behaviour was gathered in those long, faithful orbits. Through the early years of that orbit, a difficulty stood in the way of seeing the Hexagon clearly at all. Cassini arrived during the northern winter, when the pole lay tilted into shadow, wrapped in months of darkness with no sunlight to reveal the clouds in ordinary colour. For a time the Hexagon could not be photographed in visible light at all, hidden in the long polar night. So observers turned to a different kind of sight, reading not the light that bounces off clouds, but the faint warmth the planet itself gives off. In thermal infrared, the cloud tops glow softly with their own heat, and through that warm-seeing eye the Hexagon appeared even in the dark, its 6 sides traced in the planet's own quiet thermal glow, visible long before the sun came back to light it. That trick of seeing warmth instead of light revealed something the eye alone could never have caught. The Hexagon reaches downward, deeper than the clouds we see. The infrared view showed the 6-sided pattern not only in the high visible cloud deck, but also in warmer, deeper layers below. The same shape echoing down through the atmosphere like a column. The Hexagon, it turned out, was not a thin film painted on the very top of the air, but a tall feature with real vertical extent. A 6-sided shaft of structured wind reaching down into the planet. To know that the shape runs deep, that it is a column rather than a coat of paint, is to feel its solidity, its rootedness, a geometry built not on the surface of the clouds, but threaded down through them. The shape of it has been coaxed out of ordinary fluids here on Earth, in experiments that bring the wonder within reach of a laboratory bench. Researchers have taken a circular tank of liquid, set it spinning, and stirred the fluid near its edge so that the centre and the rim turn at different rates. As the spinning settles, the smooth flow breaks, just as it does on Saturn, into a ring of regular waves, and depending on the speeds involved, the fluid can arrange itself into clean polygons, triangles, squares, pentagons, and hexagons, 6-sided shapes turning in a bucket of water, a miniature echo of the pattern crowning a planet 1 billion kilometres away. The same rules that draw the figure on Saturn can draw it in a dish on a table, the cosmos in the kitchen sink obeying one law. The first time a hexagon appeared in one of those spinning tanks, it must have been a quiet thrill to witness. A team of physicists, curious whether the planet's shape could be coaxed from plain liquid, built just such an apparatus, a cylinder of water set turning with a ring near its rim spun faster than the rest. They watched the surface and saw it break, exactly as hoped, into rotating polygons, the very triangles and squares and hexagons that theory had promised. Here, on a workbench, a person could make Saturn's crown in miniature and watch it turn, the grand and distant mystery brought down to the size of a pail and held in the room. What that small experiment proved is worth holding on to, for it settled a real question. As long as the hexagon was seen only at Saturn, one might wonder whether some special quirk of that one planet made it, something rare and unrepeatable. But once the same shape rose in a tank of water under nothing more exotic than spin and shear, the matter was largely closed. The hexagon needs no special magic, only a turning fluid and a difference in speed across it. The figure that crowns a world so impossibly far off can be summoned at will in a laboratory, and that repeatability is the firmest proof that the explanation is sound. There is a deep delight in that bridge between the enormous and the small, the planet and the pale. The same physics that draws 6 sides across 30,000 kilometres of cloud draws them across a hand's width of water, the law indifferent to scale, writing the identical shape whether the canvas is a giant world or a dish on a bench. To know that you could, in principle, hold a tiny cousin of Saturn's hexagon turning in a bowl is to feel how the universe keeps one rulebook for the grand and the humble alike, the great crown of the planet and the little ring in the water spun from a single page of it. What decides which polygon appears is the difference in speed between the inner and outer flow, a quantity scientists call differential rotation. When the inner part of a spinning fluid turns at one rate and the outer part at another, the shear between them sets the wave going, and the sharpness of that difference selects the number of corners. A gentle difference might yield a smooth circle or a broad oval. A stronger one folds the flow into a triangle or a square. Somewhere in between lies the recipe for 6. On Saturn, the particular contrast between the swift polar jet and the slower air around it appears to fall just where a hexagon is favoured, the planet's own rotation tuned, as if by chance, to the 6-sided note. The fact that other shapes are possible makes the hexagon feel less like an accident and more like one option, among several the physics allows. In the laboratory tanks, as the spin is dialed up and down, the fluid steps cleanly from one polygon to the next. 3 sides, 4, 5, 6, 7, each appearing in its own range of speeds. The same governing mathematics that gives Saturn 6 sides could, on a differently spinning world, give 5 or 8. There is nothing magical about the number 6 in itself. It is simply the shape that this planet's particular speeds call forth. And yet there is a quiet beauty in knowing that the hexagon belongs to a whole hidden family of shapes, that it is the one Saturn happened to choose from a set of possibilities written into the behaviour of all turning fluids everywhere. How deep the hexagon truly reaches remains one of its open questions, a thread that disappears down into the planet beyond the reach of any camera. The visible shape and the warmer shape glimpsed in infrared below it may be only the upper expression of a structure that descends far deeper still, anchored hundreds of kilometres down in layers no light escapes. No probe has ever sounded those depths directly. The roots of the hexagon, the place where its 6-sided order is truly held, lie hidden in the dark interior of the planet, sensed only indirectly, inferred from how steadily the shape keeps the rhythm of the world below. Some part of the mystery, perhaps the deepest part, stays sealed beneath the clouds, turning quietly out of sight. If the shape runs deep below, it also reaches high above, climbing into the thin upper air. Long after Cassini's arrival, as the northern pole warmed towards summer, observers found a second hexagon stacked far above the first, a matching 6-sided pattern of temperature high in the stratosphere, hundreds of kilometres over the cloud deck figure. It was as though the hexagon were not a single sheet but a tall tower, its outline repeating at great height the same 6-cornered form it kept below. The discovery suggested that the shape is a column of remarkable vertical reach, a 6-sided pillar of structured air rising through layer after layer of the atmosphere, one geometry threaded from the deep clouds up into the heights. That high hexagon appeared only with the returning warmth, and its arrival taught something about how the seasons stir the upper air. In the cold of polar winter, the stratosphere above the pole had been too still and too cool to carry the pattern. Only as summer sunlight warmed those heights did the upper hexagon emerge, a creature of the changing season as much as of the wind. So the shape is not merely persistent but responsive, growing taller as the light returns, its upper stories built by the same returning sunlight that turned its lower colour from blue to gold. The hexagon breathes with the long Saturnian year, reaching higher in summer than in the dark of winter. To read all of this, Cassini carried a suite of patient instruments, each a different kind of eye. Some saw visible light, catching the clouds in their true muted colours. Others felt heat, mapping the warmth of the air to trace the shape through darkness. Still others read the spectrum finely enough to name the gases present, to weigh the haze, to gauge the temperature layer by layer. It was by braiding together all these separate ways of seeing light and warmth and spectrum that the full portrait of the hexagon slowly emerged. No single instrument enough on its own, the whole picture assembled from many quiet streams of patient data gathered across the years. To understand the stage on which all this unfolds, it helps to remember what kind of world Saturn is, and it is a world utterly unlike the solid ground beneath you. Saturn is a gas giant, a planet without a true surface anywhere, no shore to stand on, no rock to set a foot upon. Sink downward through its golden clouds, and there is no moment where sky becomes land. Instead, the air only grows thicker and warmer and heavier, gas thickening by slow degrees towards something dense and strange far below, with never a solid floor to meet. The hexagon floats on the very top of all that, the visible crown of a planet that is, in a sense, weather all the way down, a globe of moving air and deepening fog with a small dense heart hidden somewhere in its core. In size, this cloudy giant is second only to one other, the largest planet of all, and the scale of it dwarfs our own world entirely. Saturn is the second largest planet circling the Sun, a great pale sphere wide enough to swallow our Earth many times over. Roughly 9.5 Earths would fit across its face, and many hundreds of Earths could be packed inside its volume. Beside it, our whole world is a marble set beside a beach ball. The hexagon at its pole, vast as it is, wide enough to hold the Earth within a single one of its 6 sides, is still only a small bright cap at the top of this enormous globe, a detail on the crown of something far larger than the mind comfortably holds. For all that bulk, Saturn turns astonishingly fast, whirling through a single day in well under half the time our own world takes. A day on Saturn, one full rotation, passes in only about 10.5 hours. A world many times wider than the Earth spins so quickly that morning races into night and back again before half of one of our days has gone by. That dizzying speed of rotation is no minor detail. It is the very engine behind the hexagon, the deep, swift spinning that drives the polar jet and folds it into corners. The same rapid turning that would leave you breathless is what allows the planet to draw a steady shape at its pole. Without that haste in the deep, there would be no geometry in the sky. Stranger still, this giant world is the lightest of all the planets for its size, so airy that it would float. Saturn is the least dense planet in the entire solar system, its great bulk made of such light material, mostly the 2 lightest gases there are, that on the whole it weighs less for its volume than plain water does, which leads to the gentle, almost absurd image that has delighted people for generations. If there were an ocean wide enough to hold it, Saturn would not sink but float, bobbing on the surface like an impossible cork the size of a planet. A globe 9 times wider than the Earth, light enough to ride upon water. There is something wonderfully soft in that fact, a giant that is, in its own way, barely there, more breath than stone. That lightness and that speed together pull the whole planet gently out of the round, so that Saturn is not a perfect sphere but a slightly flattened one. Spinning so fast on so airy a body, the planet bulges outward at its equator and draws inward at its poles, taking on the shape of a ball pressed lightly between 2 hands. The difference is large enough to notice, the equator measurably wider than the distance pole to pole, the whole world a touch squashed by its own rapid turning. So the hexagon does not sit atop a perfect globe but at the flattened crown of a slightly oblate one, perched where the spin has drawn the planet inward, at the very point about which all that swift rotation turns. Pinning down exactly how fast that deep rotation runs proved one of the longer puzzles in the study of the planet. With no solid landmarks and clouds that drift at their own speeds, the true rotation of Saturn's body had to be inferred by subtler means, listening to the rhythm of its magnetic field and the radio hiss that field produces. For years the answer stayed slippery, the measurements disagreeing by minutes, the planet seeming almost to change its pace. It took careful work, and clues from features like the hexagon and from gentle ripples in the rings, to settle on a figure close to 10.5 hours. The planet's real and hidden heartbeat finally read through all the noise. Even the simple question of how long a day lasts there turned out to hold a long, quiet mystery. Saturn circles the Sun at a tremendous remove, far out in the cold where the light grows thin. The planet orbits roughly 9.5 times farther from the Sun than the Earth does, so distant that sunlight, which crosses to us in about 8 minutes, takes well over an hour to reach it. Out there the Sun is no warm disk, but a single brilliant point, dazzling still yet shrunken, casting a pale and slanting light across the cloud tops. The Hexagon turns in that far, faint sunshine, lit by a star that from Saturn looks less like a hearth than like the brightest of all the stars, a distant lamp warming a world it can barely touch. Because the Sun hangs so far away, Saturn receives only a small fraction of the light and warmth that falls on Earth. Spread across that great distance, sunlight arrives at the planet roughly 1/100th as strong as it reaches us, a thin gruel of light where our world is bathed in plenty. This is part of why the planet must warm itself from within, and why its cloud tops lie so deep in cold. The pole, when it finally turns toward the Sun in summer, greets a light far gentler than any noon we know, a wan brightness that still, across years, is enough to ripen the Hexagon's colour and raise its high summer tower. For all its great size, Saturn is built from astonishingly light stuff, and that is the secret of its low weight. The planet is made almost entirely of the two lightest elements in the universe, hydrogen and helium, the same gases that fill the Sun and the stars, gathered here into a vast cold globe instead of a burning one. There is little of rock or metal in its bulk, only these airy gases compressed by their own great weight, which is why a planet so enormous can still be lighter, for its size, than water. Saturn is, in a sense, a great failed star, made of stellar material yet never massive enough to catch fire, a sun that never lit, wearing a hexagon instead of a corona. Standing at Saturn's cloud tops, were there anywhere to stand, you would find the pull of its gravity surprisingly close to home. Despite the planet's vast size, its low density means that the gravity felt at the visible cloud surface is only a little stronger than the gravity you feel right now, perhaps 1/10 again as much. A great world many times wider than the Earth, yet its surface tug not so far from our own, the bulk and the lightness balancing out. So a person hovering at those clouds beneath the Hexagon would feel nearly the familiar weight of their own body, the giant holding them no more fiercely than the small world they came from. The planet carries an old and fitting name, drawn from the gods of the ancient world. Saturn was named for the Roman deity of time and of the harvest, the slow and patient elder among the gods, an apt title for the most distant planet the ancients could see, the one that moved most slowly across their skies. Creeping along its great orbit, taking 30 years to circle once, Saturn seemed to the old watchers the very emblem of time's slow passage, and so they gave it the name of the old god who ruled over ages and seasons. The Hexagon, turning with its own deep patience, wears a name that has meant slowness and the long turning of time for thousands of years. Saturn's golden colouring, the warm butterscotch banding that gives the planet its gentle face, comes from the clouds themselves and the haze above them. The visible cloud tops are made largely of ammonia ice, fine pale crystals frozen out of the frigid upper air, and above them floats a thin veil of haze stirred up by sunlight. Together these lend the planet its soft muted palette, creams and tans and dusky golds laid in broad horizontal bands around the globe. There are no sharp reds or vivid blues across most of its face, only these quiet pastel tones, as though the whole world had been painted in warm milk and honey. The Hexagon sits within this gentle scheme, a shape drawn in the same soft pigments that colour the rest of the planet. Beneath that visible deck of ammonia ice lie deeper layers of cloud hidden from sight, built of stranger stuff. Lower down, where the air is warmer and the pressure greater, the clouds are thought to be made of ammonium hydrosulfide, and deeper still, far below, of water, the same water that falls as rain on Earth, here suspended in clouds beneath 100 kilometres of alien sky. So Saturn wears its weather in layers, a pale visible roof of ammonia frost over hidden floors of other clouds descending into the warm dark. The bands and the hexagon and the storms all play out across the topmost deck, the only one the eye can reach, while beneath them whole hidden skies stack downward, cloud below cloud, into the deepening haze. The pastel softness of Saturn's colouring owes much to that high layer of haze, which mutes and blends whatever lies beneath. Sunlight striking the upper atmosphere brews a fine photochemical mist, a thin golden smog that hangs above the cloud tops and softens every tone, smearing the sharper colours of the deeper clouds into the muted bands we see. Without that veil, Saturn might show bolder stripes and brighter contrasts, more like the vivid, churning face of its larger neighbour. Instead, the haze lays a gentle film over everything, dimming and warming the whole planet to its characteristic creamy gold. It is the same haze that thickened over the North Pole as the seasons turned, ripening the hexagon's interior from blue toward amber. No portrait of Saturn is complete without its rings, the great shining circles that make it the most recognised planet of them all. Spreading outward from the planet's equator lies a vast, flat system of rings, bright bands of countless icy particles orbiting in a thin disk, hundreds of thousands of kilometres wide. They are made almost entirely of water ice, from grains like powdered sugar to chunks the size of houses, each one a tiny moon on its own orbit, the whole multitude catching the distant sunlight and glowing pale against the dark. For all their breadth, the rings are astonishingly thin, in most places only tens of metres from top to bottom, a sheet of ice so flat that seen edge on they nearly disappear. The hexagon turns far above the plane of those rings, at the pole, while below the bright circles spread out toward the stars. Those rings cast shadows, and the play of their shadows across the planet marks the passing of its seasons. As Saturn moves along its long orbit, the angle of the rings to the sun slowly changes, and their shadow sweeps gradually north and south across the banded face of the planet, a vast dark stripe laid by the rings themselves. Near the planet's winter, the shadow falls broad across one hemisphere. As the season turns, it narrows and slides. This shifting band of ring shadow is one of the loveliest clocks in the solar system, the planet keeping time by the shade of its own jewellery, the seasons written across its clouds in the moving shadow of its rings. When the rings were first glimpsed through an early telescope, no one could make sense of them. The astronomer who turned one of the first such instruments towards Saturn saw not clean circles, but two strange bulges flanking the planet, and wrote of it as though Saturn had handles, or ears, or perhaps two attendant companions pressed to its sides. The little telescope was too crude to resolve the truth, and for years the planet's odd shape baffled its watchers. Only decades later, with better lenses, did another observer realise that those strange appendages were in fact a thin, flat ring encircling the world, a band of brightness wrapped clean around the planet's waist. The rings hold gaps within them, dark lanes swept clear by the pull of moons. The widest and most famous of these divisions cuts a broad, dark band between the two brightest rings, a gap kept open by the gentle, repeated tug of a moon orbiting far beyond it, whose rhythm clears that lane of ice. From a distance, the rings look like solid hoops, but they're grooved and gapped and structured throughout, a vast phonograph record of ice, its grooves carved by the quiet mathematics of orbits. Each gap is a place where the timing of a moon and the timing of the ice fall into step, and the ice is slowly nudged elsewhere. The rings are forever raining down, a slow drizzle of ice falling from their inner edge into the planet below. Tiny particles at the ring's inner border, nudged by sunlight and by the planet's magnetism, drift inward and tumble at last into the upper atmosphere, a faint, steady fall of ring material descending into Saturn. This ring rain is so persistent that, across the long ages, it may slowly drain the rings away entirely, the bright circles thinning grain by grain as they feed the planet. The same world that wears a hexagon at its pole is quietly drinking its own rings from below, the jewellery dissolving slowly into the giant it adorns. That slow rain hints at a startling possibility. The rings may be young, far younger than the planet they circle. For all their grandeur, the rings appear bright and clean, only lightly dusted by the dark debris that drifts through space, and that cleanliness suggests they have not been gathering grime for the age of the solar system, but for a far shorter span. Some findings hint that the rings may have formed only a few 100 million years ago, in an era when life already swam in Earth's seas, perhaps from a moon or comet torn apart by Saturn's pull. If so, then the rings are a passing splendour, arrived long after the planet and destined one day to fade, a temporary crown of ice gracing the world for only a chapter of its long life. Saturn keeps seasons at all because it leans, tilted on its axis much as the Earth is, so that first one pole and then the other turns toward the distant sun. The planet's axis tips by nearly 27 degrees, close to our own world's gentle lean, and that tilt gives Saturn a true cycle of seasons, summer and winter trading places between its hemispheres across its long year. It is this very tilt that buries the North Pole in darkness for part of the orbit, and bathes it in light for another part, driving the slow colour change of the hexagon. The shape's shift from blue to gold is the planet's tilt made visible, the seasons of a leaning world written in the hue of its crown. But the seasons of Saturn are long beyond easy imagining, because its year is vast. The planet takes nearly 30 Earth years to circle the Sun once, drifting along its great slow orbit so far out in the cold that a single Saturnian year stretches across what would be, for a person, the better part of a lifetime. Each of its 4 seasons lasts roughly 7 of our years, so that a single Saturnian winter is longer than most childhoods. The hexagon's slow ripening from blue toward gold played out across years precisely because a season there is so enormously long, the pole held in darkness or light not for months but for years on end. Time itself runs to a grander measure at Saturn, patient past anything our calendars know. Because that year is so long, and the pole spends years tilted into darkness, the hexagon can only be seen in full when the northern summer brings sunlight back to the pole. For long stretches of the Saturnian year, the North Pole lies in shadow, and the hexagon can be glimpsed only by its own faint warmth, or not at all. Only when the slow orbit carries the northern hemisphere into its summer does sunlight pour fully across the pole and light the 6-sided shape in open colour. The chance to see the hexagon clearly is itself a seasonal gift, arriving once in each of the planet's long years, when the light finally returns to crown the pole and reveal the shape waiting there in the gold. High at those cloud tops, the cold is profound, a chill far beyond any winter our world has known. The temperature near the visible clouds of Saturn hovers around 180 degrees below zero on the Celsius scale, cold enough to freeze every familiar thing solid in an instant, cold enough that ammonia itself falls as snow. The hexagon spins through air of that bitter temperature, its golden hue belying just how frigid the heights of Saturn truly are. And yet there is no sting in knowing it, no shiver to fear. It is simply the deep cold of distance, the natural temperature of a world so far from the sun that its star is only a brilliant point, warming the cloud tops barely at all. Distant as it is, Saturn can be seen from your own back garden, a steady golden point among the stars. To the unaided eye, the planet shows as a calm yellowish light that does not twinkle the way the true stars do, holding instead a soft, steady glow as it drifts slowly along the band of sky the planets travel. People have watched it move there for thousands of years, the slowest of the wandering lights, and you can find it still on a clear night, the same world whose pole wears a hexagon, hanging quietly overhead within reach of an upward glance. Through even a modest telescope, that golden point blooms into a small, perfect wonder, the rings springing suddenly into view. With a little magnification, Saturn resolves into a tiny pale disk girdled by its bright ring, a sight so striking that many who see it for the first time fall silent, scarcely believing the planet could look so much like its pictures. The hexagon itself lies too small and too far to glimpse this way, hidden at the pole beyond the reach of backyard glass, yet the rings alone are enough to stop the breath, a ringed jewel floating in the dark eyepiece, the most beloved sight the night sky offers to a small telescope. If you could stand somewhere within Saturn's high clouds and look up, the sky above you would be a strange and lovely thing. The distant sun would hang small and pale, no warm disk but a brilliant far-off spark, and the light around you would be soft and golden and slanting, filtered through layers of haze. Above, the great arc of the rings might rise across the sky, a luminous bridge of ice spanning the heavens from horizon to horizon. It would be a quiet place, that cloud sky, lit by a faraway star and crowned by rings, the air thick and cold and tinted amber, the whole scene hushed and dim and golden as a long evening that never quite ends. In that cold, what falls from Saturn's clouds is not water but ammonia, drifting down as a pale frozen snow. High in the atmosphere where the temperature plunges, ammonia freezes into fine white crystals and sifts slowly downward, a snowfall of a substance that on Earth we know only as a sharp, clear liquid. To imagine it is to picture a silent, endless snow of an alien kind, pale flakes drifting through golden haze, falling and falling through air no one has ever breathed, the gentle weather of a world whose every familiar thing is made strange by the cold. Strangely, though, Saturn is not heated by sunlight alone, for the planet glows with a warmth of its own from deep within. Saturn gives off considerably more heat than it receives from the distant sun, radiating energy from its own interior out into space, so that the planet is, in a quiet way, still slowly warm at its core. This inner heat rises from the depths and helps to stir the atmosphere, driving winds and storms from below as well as above. The Hexagon and all the planet's weather are powered not only by the faint far sunlight, but by this steady glow welling up from inside, a world warming itself from within against the enormous cold without. Part of that inner warmth comes from a slow, strange rain falling deep inside the planet, far below any cloud. In the crushing pressures of Saturn's interior, helium is thought to condense into fine droplets that sink slowly toward the core, a rain of liquid helium falling through layers of hydrogen, releasing heat as it descends. This deep helium rain, falling forever through the hidden depths, is one of the sources of the warmth the planet radiates, an interior weather of its own playing out in the dark thousands of kilometers beneath the visible clouds. While the Hexagon turns in the high cold air far below, in places no light will ever reach, a quiet rain of helium drifts endlessly downward, warming the giant from within. Saturn's skies hold lightning too, but lightning of a power that dwarfs our own. The storms of Saturn crackle with electrical discharges, and some of them are enormously stronger than any bolt that strikes the Earth. Flashes so powerful they have been called superbolts, blazing in the deep clouds with the radio crackle that first betrayed them. These great discharges flicker far down in the water cloud layers, deep beneath the visible deck, their light occasionally glimpsed as faint flashes on the planet's night side. The same atmosphere that draws a calm hexagon at its pole can, elsewhere, loose lightning mightier than anything in our skies, the gentle and the violent woven together in one vast envelope of air. Every few decades, Saturn unleashes a storm so immense it changes the whole face of the planet, a tempest known as a great white spot. Roughly once in each Saturnian year, which is to say about every 30 Earth years, a colossal storm erupts in the planet's atmosphere, a brilliant white cloud system that swells and spreads until it can be seen even through modest telescopes from Earth. These are among the largest storms in the solar system, vast bright eruptions that boil up from the deeper layers and unfurl across the banded face of the world. The Hexagon turns on through them all, fixed at the pole, while down in the lower latitudes these once-a-generation tempests bloom and fade across the long Saturnian seasons. One such great storm, watched closely in the years 2010 and 11, grew until it wrapped entirely around the planet. Beginning as a single bright spot, it swelled and stretched along the planet's banding until its head met its own tail, a ribbon of storm encircling the whole world, the largest tempest seen on Saturn in a generation. Cassini watched it bloom from orbit, and earthbound telescopes tracked it from afar, this enormous white serpent of cloud girdling the planet. It was a rare gift of timing, a once-in-decades storm unfolding in full view of a spacecraft that happened to be there to see it, the planet putting on its grandest display while it was finally being watched up close. That encircling storm did more than ring the planet. Its disturbance reached all the way to the polar region and stirred the air near the Hexagon itself. The great tempest effects rippled outward and upward, warming the stratosphere and sending vast beacons of heat into the high atmosphere, touching latitudes far from where it began. For a time, the orderly machinery of the polar winds felt the echo of that distant violence. The Hexagon's serene geometry briefly neighbour to one of the most turbulent events the planet had shown in decades. Even at the calm pole, the planet is one connected ocean of air, and a storm on one part of it sends its tremor through the whole. Saturn glows with auroras too, curtains of light hanging over its poles much as they do over Earth's. Where charged particles from the Sun and from the planet's own magnetic field spiral down into the upper atmosphere near the poles, they kindle great shimmering ovals of light, auroras encircling the polar regions, glowing most brightly in ultraviolet hues the eye cannot quite see. These polar lights ring the very region the Hexagon crowns, so that above the six-sided shape, high in the thin upper air, curtains of auroral glow rise and fade. The pole of Saturn wears both at once, a hexagon of cloud below and a crown of dancing light above, geometry and glow stacked together over the northern cap. Saturn's auroras can burn for days at a stretch, far steadier than the flickering lights of Earth, and they shine in colours tuned to the planet's hydrogen air rather than to our own, so that the glow ringing the Hexagon is kin to our northern lights yet subtly its own, a different note of the same cosmic music played out above a different pole. Saturn's magnetic field has a peculiar gift that sets it apart from every other planet. Most planets, the Earth among them, carry magnetic fields that are tilted, leaning at an angle to the axis about which the world spins. Saturn's field is different. It is aligned almost perfectly with the planet's rotation axis, its magnetic pole sitting nearly atop its spin poles, an arrangement found nowhere else in the solar system. This near-perfect alignment is itself a small mystery, since the usual theories of how planets generate magnetism expect at least a slight tilt. Saturn, in its quiet way, breaks that rule, spinning a field as straight as its axis, the magnetism and the rotation sharing a single line through the heart of the world. That very straightness made the planet's true rotation maddeningly hard to read. A tilted field, sweeping around as a planet spins, sends out a steady radio pulse that ticks off each rotation like a beacon. This is how the deep spin of other giant worlds was first timed. But Saturn's field, aligned so neatly with its axis, gives off no such clean wobble, and the radio rhythm it does produce drifts and changes, refusing to settle on one period. For years the planet seemed almost to slow and quicken, the radio clock disagreeing with itself, until subtler methods finally teased the true rate from the confusion. The planet kept the secret of its own day longer than almost any world. The winds at Saturn's equator blow at a speed that beggars belief, far swifter even than the polar jet that draws the Hexagon. Around the planet's middle, the air streams eastward at well over 1,000 kilometers an hour, among the fastest sustained winds found on any planet, a great river of air racing around the equator many times faster than any storm on Earth. Compared with that equatorial torrent, the Hexagon's jet is almost leisurely. The whole planet is wrapped in ferocious moving air, swiftest at its waist and folded into geometry at its pole, a world of wind from end to end. Those equatorial winds rush along in the same direction the planet turns, a phenomenon that puzzles those who study it. The air does not merely keep pace with the spinning globe but races ahead of it, streaming eastward faster than the planet beneath, a super rotation whose engine is not fully understood. Something deep within is pumping that great current, driving the equatorial air to outrun the very world it rides upon. It is one more way that Saturn's atmosphere surprises, the planet's winds at the equator outpacing the ground that bears them, just as the hexagon at the pole keeps a shape the ground has no business holding. The radio voice of the planet, that drifting pulse from its magnetic field, carries a strange beauty when it is turned into sound. The natural radio emissions Saturn pours into space, when shifted into the range of human hearing, become a chorus of whistles and rising tones and soft eerie cries, the song of charged particles dancing in the planet's magnetism. Spacecraft have caught this radio music and carried it home, letting us hear, in a sense, the planet sing. The same field that draws the auroras and shields the world and once hid its rotation also fills the surrounding dark with a quiet, ceaseless music, inaudible across the vacuum yet there all the same, the hexagon turning beneath a sky of unheard song. The planet keeps a great company of moons, a swarm of worlds circling it in the dark. Saturn is attended by well over 140 known moons, more than any other planet, a vast retinue ranging from a single giant moon down to countless small icy bodies and tumbling shards no larger than mountains. Some orbit close among the rings, shepherding the ice. Others trace wide, slow loops far out in the cold. Together they make Saturn the centre of a miniature system all its own, a great golden world surrounded by a turning court of moons, while at its pole the hexagon keeps its solitary watch. The grandest of those moons is Titan, a world so large and so wrapped in atmosphere that it is a place unto itself. Titan is bigger than the planet Mercury, swaddled in a thick orange atmosphere denser than our own, the only moon in the solar system to wear so substantial a sky. Beneath its haze lie lakes and seas, not of water but of liquid methane and ethane, rivers of cold hydrocarbons carving channels across a frozen landscape, rain of methane falling from methane clouds. It is the one other place known where stable liquid pools on the surface under an open sky, a strange and distant cousin to our own world of seas and rain, circling the same planet whose pole wears a hexagon. Vast fields of dark dunes stretch across its equator, sculpted by gentle winds into long parallel ridges, and the small probe that once parachuted down through Titan's haze found, at the bottom, a damp plain strewn with rounded pebbles of ice, smoothed as river stones are smoothed, by liquid that had flowed there in some earlier season. A whole patient landscape, wind-carved and rain-worn, waits beneath that orange sky, the gentlest of worlds tucked in among Saturn's many moons. Another of Saturn's moons hides an ocean and breathes it into space. Enceladus, a small bright moon sheathed in clean white ice, sends great plumes of water vapour and ice grains jetting up from cracks near its southern pole, fountaining the contents of a hidden sea out into the dark. Beneath its frozen shell lies a global ocean of liquid water, kept warm by the flexing tides of its orbit and through fissures in the ice that ocean escapes in glittering geysers, feeding one of Saturn's faint outer rings with its spray. That spray, when the spacecraft flew through it and tasted it, proved to be salty and laced with the simple molecules that life elsewhere is built from, so that this little moon's hidden sea is counted among the gentlest places to wonder whether life might somewhere stir. A tiny moon throwing salted seawater at the stars, while the great planet it circles keeps its hexagon turning quietly far away. The rings themselves, seen close, resolve into a wonder of structure, not solid bands, but countless particles flowing in ordered lanes. What looks from afar like smooth shining hoops is, up close, a vast swarm of separate icy bodies, each on its own orbit, organised into thousands of fine ringlets and gaps and waves. Small moons embedded among them tug and shepherd the ice, carving sharp edges and raising delicate ripples that spread like grooves on a record. The whole bright system is a slow, intricate dance of ice and gravity, every particle obeying the same pull, the rings a living diagram of orbital motion laid flat and shining around the planet's waist. Among the smaller moons, one called Mimas wears a single enormous crater that gives it a strange and famous face. Mimas is a modest ball of ice marked by one vast impact scar so large, relative to the little moon, that it lends Mimas a curious resemblance to a great staring eye, or to a certain fictional battle station from a beloved film. The crater is the relic of an ancient collision that very nearly shattered the small world entirely, leaving it forever marked by that single huge basin. It is a reminder of how violent the deep past of this gentle-seeming system once was. The calm of the present built atop ages of impact, all of it now turning quietly around the same hexagon-crowned planet. Another moon, called Iapetus, wears two faces, one bright as snow and one dark as soot. As it journeys around the planet, this strange world keeps one hemisphere coated in clean white ice, and the other stained a deep, dusky brown, so that it seems painted half in light and half in shadow, brightening and darkening as it turns to show first one side and then the other. The dark coating is thought to be a thin layer of dust gathered as the moon sweeps along its path, baked darker by the faint sunlight. A single small world, half white and half black, circling the same giant whose pole keeps a hexagon, the solar system delighting in its oddities. A small moon named Hyperion tumbles through space without any settled rhythm, end over end, never the same way twice. Most moons turn in steady time with their orbits, keeping one face toward their planet, but Hyperion, oddly shaped and porous as a sponge, pitches and rolls chaotically, its spin forever changing, so that no one could say in advance which way it will be facing on any given day. Its surface is riddled with deep pits, light as pumice, dark in the hollows, a great drifting cinder of ice and rock turning unpredictably in the cold. Among all the orderly motions of the system, this one little moon spins to no schedule at all, a small wildness amid the clockwork. Some of Saturn's tiniest moons, those that ride within or beside the rings, have been shaped by the ring material into curious forms. Sweeping up ice as they orbit, a few of these little bodies have gathered ridges of material around their middles, so that they take on the look of flying saucers or of small dumplings, a smooth ridge circling their equators like the rim of a hat. They are sculptors and sculptures at once, carving gaps in the rings even as the rings reshape them, the smallest members of Saturn's great family bearing the fingerprints of the bright circles among which they live. Far out from the planet, a dark moon called Phoebe circles backward against the grain of all the rest. While Saturn's larger moons orbit in the same direction the planet spins, Phoebe travels the opposite way, looping the planet in reverse on a wide, tilted, distant path. This backward motion marks it as a wanderer captured long ago, a body that did not form alongside Saturn, but was caught by its gravity from elsewhere and held, an adopted moon keeping its own contrary course. The faint dark dust it sheds drifts inward, and is thought to be what stains one face of Iapetus, one outer moon quietly colouring another across the gulf between them. When Cassini photographed the hexagon from on high, the moon sometimes drifted into the frame, lending the great shape a sense of company and scale. A tiny bright point of a moon might hang in the dark beside the vast six-sided crown, or the rings might cut across a corner of the view, the whole golden system gathered into a single image. These portraits place the hexagon within its family, no lone curiosity but the crown of a world attended by rings and moons, the geometry at the pole and the swarm of icy worlds around it, all belonging to one quietly turning whole. The answer lies in a kind of matching, a resonance between the speed of the polar jet and the size of the loop it must travel around the pole. The meandering wave that bends the jet has a natural wavelength, a preferred distance between one bend and the next, set by the speed of the flow and the physics of the rotating planet. Fit that wavelength around the circle of the pole, and it happens to close neatly into 6 repetitions, 6 bends, 6 corners, 6 sides. Change the speed or the latitude and a different number might fit. 6 is simply the count that closes the loop cleanly on this particular world. That same logic of a wave that must fit a certain number of times around a circle runs through much of nature, far beyond Saturn. A string plucked on an instrument sounds the notes that fit its length. A drum skin shivers in patterns set by its rim. The rings of Saturn carry waves spaced by orbital resonance. Everywhere a wave confined to a loop or a length can only take on the shapes that fit it whole, and from that simple rule arise tones and patterns and, at the pole of a giant planet, a hexagon. The six-sided shape is one verse of a song the whole universe seems to know. The song of waves settling into the only shapes their boundaries allow. Our own planet plays a quieter version of the same music, for Earth's high-altitude jet streams meander in just this way. The fast rivers of air that circle the globe at the level where airliners fly do not run straight, but wind in long waves, dipping toward the equator and swinging back toward the poles, the very same Rossby waves that fold Saturn's jet into corners. On Earth, these waves rarely lock into a closed polygon, but they shape every week of our weather, steering warm air north and cold air south as they ripple around the world. The hexagon on Saturn is an extreme and beautiful cousin of the ordinary waving jet stream that decides whether tomorrow on Earth brings sun or rain. Earth even has its own polar vortex, a great cold whirl of air spinning over each pole through the winter. High above the Arctic and the Antarctic, a circle of fast wind wraps around the pole each winter, sealing in a pool of frigid air, much as Saturn's polar jet wraps its own cold cap. When Earth's vortex is strong and tight, it holds the cold gathered at the pole. When it weakens and wobbles, that cold can spill southward in great lobes. It is, in miniature and in less geometric form, the same kind of feature Saturn wears so grandly, a polar wind wall ringing a cold cap, a faint earthly echo of the hexagon's central machinery. Saturn is not the only giant to keep geometry at its pole, for its larger neighbour hides a pattern of its own. A spacecraft sent to circle Jupiter, peering down at that planet's poles, found not one storm but a ring of them, great cyclones gathered around the pole in a tidy arrangement, 8 or 9 of them at the north encircling a central storm like petals around the heart of a flower. They hold their formation with the same surprising steadiness, a polygon not of straight walls but of separate storms, each enormous, locked into a geometric ring. Both giants, it seems, draw clean figures at their poles, each in its own way, the gas planet sharing a quiet fondness for polar order. The two arrangements differ in their kind, and the difference is itself instructive. Saturn keeps a single great wave folded into 6 sides, one continuous jet bending around the pole. Jupiter keeps a cluster of discrete storms holding station in a ring, many cyclones rather than one shape. Yet both achieve a stable polar geometry, a lasting pattern at the spin point of a turning world, arrived at by different routes. To set the two side by side is to see that the impulse toward polar order runs deep in these vast atmospheres, expressed as a hexagon on one world and as a ring of storms on another, the cosmos drawing figures at the poles of giants in more ways than one. By any reckoning, Saturn's hexagon stands among the largest single coherent structures of weather known anywhere in the solar system. It is no fleeting cloud or passing storm, but a vast, stable, geometric feature wider than a world, holding its form across decades. Few patterns anywhere are at once so enormous, so regular, and so enduring, a shape that combines great size with clean geometry and long life in a way nothing else quite matches. Among all the swirls and bands and spots that decorate the planets, this one 6-sided crown is uniquely itself, the grandest geometric figure the worlds are known to keep. Hexagons, it turns out, are one of nature's favourite shapes, appearing wherever space must be filled or packed with the greatest efficiency. The honeycomb a bee builds is hexagonal, because 6-sided cells fit together with no wasted gap and the least possible wax for the most possible room. The same 6-sided packing shows up in the eyes of insects, in the cracks of drying mud, in the columns of certain cooled lavas, in the close gathering of bubbles in foam. 6 sides are simply what emerges again and again when many things press evenly together, or when a pattern seeks its most economical form. Saturn's hexagon is born of moving air rather than packing, yet it joins that same wide family of sixes that runs all through the natural world. Where rivers of molten rock once cooled slowly, the ground itself sometimes cracks into hexagonal columns, stone echoes of Saturn's shape. Certain ancient lava flows, cooling and contracting evenly, split into great fields of tall 6-sided pillars, packed side by side like a paved floor of giant tiles, found in famous places where people walk across them and marvel. The same geometry that the polar wind draws in the clouds of Saturn, the rock draws as it cools on the ground, 6 sides arising from the even pull of contraction. To stand on such stone columns is to stand on a hexagonal pattern, kin to the one crowning Saturn, the same shape written once in cooling rock and once in turning cloud. Even the gathering of soap bubbles reaches toward the hexagon given the chance to settle. Press many bubbles of the same size gently together, and they arrange their shared walls into 6-sided figures, each bubble pushing on its neighbours until the films meet at even angles, and the pattern tends toward hexagons. It is the same principle as the honeycomb, the most efficient division of a surface into equal cells, emerging on its own from nothing but bubbles seeking balance. The froth on a still pond, the foam on a warm drink, carries a faint memory of the same geometry that the winds keep at the top of Saturn, 6 sides arising wherever a pattern settles into its easiest form. There is something quietly reassuring in how often the number 6 appears, as though the universe keeps returning to a shape it trusts. From the snowflake's 6 arms to the honeycomb's 6 walls, from cracked mud to cooled basalt to the crown of a distant planet, the hexagon recurs across scales separated by a billionfold, drawn by water and by wax and by wind and by stone. It is one of the deep grammar rules of the physical world, a form that nature reaches for again and again when balance and economy are sought. To meet it on Saturn, vast and turning, is to recognize an old friend wearing its grandest possible face, the same 6 sides you might find in frost on a window, scaled up to the size of a world. The snowflake's 6 arms, the gentlest hexagon of all, arise from the very shape of water itself, frozen small. When water freezes, its molecules lock together at angles that favour a 6-fold symmetry, and that hidden hexagonal habit blooms outward as the crystal grows, branching into 6 arms, each a near mirror of the others. Every snowflake that ever drifted past a window carried that same 6-fold signature, written into it by the geometry of frozen water. The same number that crowns Saturn falls quietly from every winter sky, each flake a tiny hexagon, each one unique and yet 6-armed all the same. Deeper still, in the very architecture of matter, 6-sided rings appear among the atoms themselves. Carbon, the element of all living things, often arranges itself into hexagonal rings, 6 atoms joined in a perfect ring, and these rings tile together to build the strong flat sheets found in pencil lead, and in the wondrously thin material a single atom deep that scientists prize so highly. The graphite that leaves a grey line on paper is built of countless hexagons stacked in layers, the same shape at the scale of atoms that the polar jet traces across the clouds of a distant giant. From the smallest grains of matter to the crown of a giant world, the hexagon recurs, a favourite of nature across a span almost beyond comprehension. Where columns of cooled lava stand in their famous fields, people have long woven legends around the strange regularity of the stone. One celebrated stretch of hexagonal pillars by a northern sea was named for a giant in old tales, imagined as a causeway he built to stride across the water. So perfectly square did the columns seem, so unlike the work of mere chance. The truth that the rock simply cracked into hexagons as it cooled is no less wonderful than the legend. Across the world, wherever thick lava cooled slowly and evenly, the ground split into these 6-sided colonnades, and everywhere people met them they felt, as you might feel looking at Saturn, that surely something must have meant to make a shape so clean. The honeycomb deserves a second, closer look, for the bee solves a problem of pure geometry without ever knowing it. Faced with the task of storing the most honey using the least wax, the bee builds in hexagons, and mathematicians have shown that this is very nearly the perfect answer. The shape that divides a surface into equal cells with the shortest possible total wall. The bee does not calculate, it simply builds as its nature directs, and its nature has found the same economical six-sided form that the cooling rock finds, and the freezing water, and the packing bubbles. Saturn's wind finds it too by a different road, all of them arriving at 6, the number where balance and thrift meet. The number 6 has long held a quiet place of honour among those who study numbers, for reasons all its own. It is the first of what mathematicians call a perfect number, equal to the sum of the smaller numbers that divide it evenly, 1 and 2 and 3 adding back to 6. Such numbers are rare and were prized by the ancients as marks of a hidden harmony in arithmetic, a wholeness folded into the count itself. That the same number should also be the one a planet's winds choose for their crown is, of course, only a happy accident, and yet there is a pleasure in it, the figure of perfect balance reappearing as the shape of perfect balance in the sky. 6 is also the count of how many circles fit snugly around 1, packed close on a flat surface. Set a coin on a table and gather others tightly around it, and exactly 6 will ring it without gap or overlap, each touching the centre and its 2 neighbours, the 7 coins making a small hexagonal cluster. This is why oranges in a crate and bubbles in a foam, and seeds in a sunflower tend towards 6-fold packing, the most crowded and efficient way to fill a plane. The hexagon is simply what this close gathering becomes when the circles press until their round edges flatten into shared walls, the shape that the tightest possible packing draws. Across art and architecture too, people have reached for the hexagon wherever they wish to tile a surface without waste. Floors and windows and patterned screens through the ages have used 6-sided tiles, because hexagons, like squares and triangles, fit together to cover a surface completely, leaving no awkward gaps between them. Of those 3 shapes that tile a plane, the hexagon encloses the most space for the least edge, which is why it feels at once so efficient and so pleasing to the eye. To meet the same figure crowning Saturn is to find that the planet has tiled its pole with the very shape human hands have long chosen to tile their floors, geometry and giant agreeing on a favourite form. Back at the pole, the corners of the hexagon hold a small secret of their own, for they are not perfectly sharp but gently rounded with turning eddies. Where the jet stream swings around each of the 6 corners, the flow curls slightly, spinning off small whirlpools that soften the angle just a little, the way water eddies at the bend of a fast stream. These corner eddies are tiny only by the planet's vast measure. Each could swallow whole countries of Earth. They are part of what keeps the wave stable, helping the jet negotiate its sharp turns without tearing apart, the geometry maintained by a constant gentle curling at each of its 6 points. The corners are sharp from far away and rounded up close, clean line and soft eddy at once. The whole hexagon, seen in the false colours that scientists use to map invisible light, becomes a thing of startling beauty, painted in hues no eye would natively see. By assigning colours to different wavelengths of infrared, observers turn the warmth and chemistry of the cloud tops into vivid images, and in these the hexagon can blaze in unearthly teals and golds and deep blue violets, its central storm a brilliant eye, its 6 sides ringed in luminous bands. These are not the planet's true colours, but a kind of translation, the invisible made visible, revealing structure the plain eye would miss. Through that translated light, the hexagon shows its full intricacy, layer and swirl and corner rendered in colours, borrowed to let human eyes read the planet's hidden heat. Above and within the visible clouds, fine layers of haze stack through Saturn's upper air, lending the hexagon its softened, veiled appearance. The atmosphere is not a single clear medium, but a series of thin hazes at different heights, each scattering the light a little, so that the cloud features seem to swim behind layers of gentle mist. This stacking of hazes is part of why Saturn's face looks so smooth and muted compared to the sharper turbulence of other worlds. The layered veils blur and gentle everything beneath them. The hexagon turns behind these high, thin films, its edges softened by the same haze that warms the planet's colour, a geometric shape glimpsed through layered glass. Within the great central storm at the pole, smaller storms swirl, a hierarchy of vortices nested one within another. The polar vortex is not a single smooth swirl, but a system of eddies, smaller whirlpools of cloud circling within the larger spiral, turning within turning at the heart of the hexagon. Each level of the storm holds its own finer motion, the great wheel made of lesser wheels, all of them spinning together around the pole. It is a fractal kind of weather, pattern within pattern, the eye of the hexagon filled not with one simple swirl, but with a whole turning ecosystem of cloud, vortices riding within vortices down toward the axis of the world. Consider for a moment the sheer stillness at the very centre, the pole point itself about which all of this turns. At the exact axis of the planet, the spin point about which the whole globe wheels, the rotation that flings the jet around at hundreds of kilometers an hour slows to nothing, for the centre of a turning thing does not travel at all. There, at the still heart of the hexagon sits a point of perfect calm, the unmoving pivot around which the entire vast machinery wheels. The hexagon, the central storm, the whole spinning planet, all turn about that single quiet point, the one place in all that motion that holds perfectly still. Every wheeling thing has such a centre, and Saturn's is crowned with a hexagon turning around it. The polar storm has held its place for so long in part because, unlike storms on Earth, it has no land to break it. A hurricane on our world weakens and dies when it drags across a coastline, robbed of the warm sea that feeds it. But Saturn has no coastline anywhere, no continent, no shore. Its storms ride forever over an unbroken ocean of cloud with nothing to slow them. So the polar vortex, once established, can spin on for decades or longer, never running aground, never starved of the deep warmth that sustains it. The very absence of solid ground, which makes Saturn so alien, is part of what lets its great storms endure, turning undisturbed where an earthly storm would long since have spent itself and faded. Storms on the gas giants, in general, are creatures of astonishing endurance, lasting years, decades, even centuries where ours last days. On Saturn's larger neighbour, a single storm has raged for hundreds of years without ceasing. On Saturn itself, the polar vortices and the hexagon persist across the whole span of human observation. Freed from the drag of land and fed by deep internal heat, the weather of these giant worlds runs on a vastly longer clock than ours. A storm on Earth is a brief event, born and gone within a week. A storm on Saturn can be an institution, older than any person watching it, turning steadily through generation after generation of those who study it from afar. Saturn's weather reaches far deeper than the thin skin of cloud the eye can see, descending thousands of kilometers into the planet. The winds that draw the hexagon are not a shallow surface phenomenon, but the top of a circulation that runs down through enormous depths, the jet streams rooted far below the visible clouds. Measurements of the planet's gravity have suggested that the great east-west winds extend perhaps 2,000 kilometers down before they finally fade into the deeper interior. So the hexagon is the visible cap of a weather system of staggering depth, a shape at the top of winds that reach down farther than the entire width of many a smaller world. The geometry we see only the crown of something vast and deep. Far below all weather, in the crushing heart of the planet, hydrogen itself is squeezed into a strange metallic form. Under the immense pressures deep inside Saturn, hydrogen, ordinarily the lightest and most insubstantial of gases, is compressed until it behaves like a liquid metal, conducting electricity, flowing in great currents through the planet's interior. It is this vast inner sea of metallic hydrogen, churning as the planet spins, that generates Saturn's magnetic field. The same field whose perfect alignment with the spin axis is such a puzzle. The hexagon at the surface and the magnetism around the whole planet both spring in the end from the same deep source, a giant world of compressed hydrogen turning fast in the dark. At the very centre of Saturn, beneath the metallic hydrogen, there is thought to lie a core dense and hot, the planet's hidden seed. Estimates suggest a core of heavier materials, rock and ice and metal, many times the mass of the entire Earth, buried at the heart of the giant under unimaginable pressure and heat. Some recent findings hint that this core may not be a sharp solid ball, but a diffuse fuzzy region where heavy elements blend gradually into the hydrogen above, a core smeared softly into the planet rather than set apart from it. Whatever its exact nature, it sits there at the centre, the dense small heart of a great light world, the deep anchor about which everything, including the hexagon, ultimately turns. The pressures within Saturn climb to values almost beyond comprehension, growing crushing long before the core, descend into the planet, and the weight of all the gas above presses down ever harder, the pressure rising through thousands of times, millions of times, the pressure of our own thin air at sea level. It is these enormous pressures that transform hydrogen to metal and squeeze the deep interior into states of matter found nowhere on Earth. The gentle hexagon, floating serene at the cloud tops, rests atop a column of atmosphere whose lower reaches are among the most crushingly pressured environments in the solar system, the calm crown of a world of titanic interior force. That sea of metallic hydrogen, or one to call it a sea, would be the largest ocean in all the solar system, vaster by far than any pool of water on any world. It is an ocean not of water, but of liquid metal hydrogen, filling a great shell deep within the planet, thousands of kilometers thick, dark and hot and conducting, with no shore and no surface anywhere. No light has ever touched it, no probe will ever swim it, and yet it is there, the single largest body of liquid known, a hidden metallic ocean greater than all the seas of every planet combined, lying silent in the heart of the world beneath the turning hexagon. Saturn is also, very slowly, still shrinking, and in that slow contraction lies a part of its warmth. Across the long ages, the planet gradually settles inward upon itself, drawn by its own gravity, and as it contracts it releases heat, much as a thing pressed grows warm. This patient shrinking, almost too slow to measure, helps account for the extra heat the planet pours into space, the warmth that rises to stir its winds and storms. The giant is gently falling in upon itself across the eons, and that imperceptible collapse keeps it faintly warm within, feeding from below the very weather that draws its crown. That deep churning of metallic hydrogen, the engine of the magnetic field, is a kind of vast natural dynamo. As the conducting fluid flows and the planet spins, it generates and sustains the magnetic field that wraps Saturn and shapes its auroras and shields it from the solar wind. This dynamo runs on the planet's rotation and its internal heat, a self-sustaining generator the size of a world, spinning out magnetism into the surrounding dark. The same rapid rotation that folds the polar jet into a hexagon also drives this deep dynamo, so that the shape at the pole and the magnetic field around the whole planet are, in a sense, two expressions of one turning, the spin of Saturn made visible above and felt all around. In a discovery of rare elegance, the rings themselves turned out to be listening to the planet's interior, recording its deepest tremors. As Saturn quivers very faintly from within, its whole vast body oscillating in slow modes too subtle to see directly. Those tremors tug on the rings, raising delicate spiral waves in the ice at certain distances, the way a struck bell would set nearby chimes ringing in sympathy. By reading those waves in the rings, scientists have begun to sound the planet's hidden interior, learning of its depths from the patterns its trembling writes in the ice. The rings became a seismograph wrapped around the world, the planet's inner music recorded in bands of orbiting frost. What that ring-born listening has revealed is a core stranger and softer than once supposed. Rather than a sharp ball of rock buried cleanly beneath the gas, the heavy elements at Saturn's centre appear to be smeared gradually outward, blending by slow degrees into the hydrogen above, a great fuzzy heart with no firm edge. This diffuse core stretches across a large fraction of the planet, heavy material and light gas mingling through a vast region rather than meeting at a clean boundary. The deep middle of Saturn, it seems, is not a stone in a cloud but a slow gradient, the planet dense at its centre and lightening outward with no sharp line anywhere, soft all the way through. Saturn took shape long ago, in the same ancient gathering that built the Sun and all its worlds. More than 4 billion years passed, out of a great disk of gas and dust circling the newborn Sun, Saturn drew together, its core forming first and then sweeping up an enormous envelope of hydrogen and helium from the surrounding cloud before that gas dispersed. The planet has turned ever since, cooling slowly, settling its helium rain, keeping its weather for an age longer than the mind can truly hold. The Hexagon's 40 years of watched persistence are the merest sliver of that history, a single recent breath in a life measured in billions of years. The young Saturn may not have formed where it now orbits, but wandered inward or outward across the early solar system. In the disorder of the solar system's first ages, the giant planets are thought to have shifted their paths, migrating through the disk under the pull of gas and of one another, before settling at last into the orbits they keep today. Saturn may have drifted a great distance before finding its present station, its slow journey helping to shape the arrangement of the whole solar system, flinging smaller bodies about as it moved. The serene planet of the present, with its quiet hexagon, is the calm survivor of a far more restless youth. How the hexagon stays so precisely centred, neither drifting nor decaying, comes down to a deep property of rotating fluids that scientists call potential vorticity. In a spinning atmosphere, this quantity tends to be conserved, and its distribution around the pole can lock a wave into place, holding the meander steady rather than letting it wander or wash out. The hexagon is, in effect, a wave trapped by the way spin and flow conspire to keep it standing, pinned at the pole by the very physics of the turning planet. It does not need to be held by anything outside itself. The rotation maintains it from within, the same way a spinning top stands upright by virtue of its own turning. The shape is self-sustaining, kept by motion rather than threatened by it. In a sense, the hexagon is a kind of racetrack for the wind, a fixed circuit the jet stream runs again and again. The fast polar river flows around the same six-sided loop endlessly, the corners and straightaways always in the same place, the wind forever lapping its own great course. Nothing redraws the track, the flow itself maintains it, the wave standing while the air streams through it, much as a standing wave in a river holds its shape while the water rushes on. So the cloud shape you picture is not a thing the wind passes once and leaves, but a path the wind keeps, a permanent six-sided course circling the pole that the jet runs without rest, the same lines traced over and over across the years. There is a near symmetry to the hexagon that the eye finds deeply satisfying, the 6 sides and 6 corners arranged with such regularity that the figure looks almost machined. While no natural shape is ever perfect, the hexagon comes remarkably close, its sides of nearly equal length, its corners spaced at nearly even angles around the pole. That regularity is part of what makes it so arresting, so unlike the usual smears and swirls of planetary weather. The mind, which everywhere seeks order, finds here an order it did not expect and cannot easily explain, a clean geometric figure offered up by a churning ball of gas, symmetry blooming unbidden in a place that had no need of it. The stability of the hexagon carries a quiet lesson, if you care to hold one as you rest. Here is a pattern that has kept its shape for at least 40 years, very likely far longer, holding firm at the pole of a planet through storm and season and the long polar dark, defended by nothing but the way the air there moves. It did not have to be coaxed or maintained or repaired. It simply found a form that balanced and kept it, steady across decades while worlds turned and probes came and went. There is a deep restfulness in the existence of such a thing, a shape so at ease in its own equilibrium that it persists across human lifetimes without effort, turning quietly whether or not a single eye is watching. The discovery of the hexagon gently changed how scientists think about the skies of other worlds. Before it, a planet's weather was imagined mostly as swirls and bands and spots, the familiar grammar of storms. Few had supposed that an atmosphere might organise itself into clean geometry and hold it for ages. The hexagon showed that moving air, under the right spin and shear, can settle into stable shapes as orderly as anything drawn with a compass, and that lesson now travels with those who study the winds of distant planets. A reminder that nature's atmospheres hold more order, and stranger order, than once was guessed. Saturn keeps its own slow appointment with the stars, returning to the same place in the sky only once in about 30 years. As it creeps along its great circuit, the planet drifts steadily through the constellations of the zodiac, spending a couple of years against each before drifting onward to the next, so that a single circuit of the heavens takes the better part of 3 decades. A person might see Saturn return to the very star it stood beside at their birth only twice, or perhaps 3 times in a long life. The ancients, watching it linger and pass through one constellation after another, felt in that unhurried march the very pulse of time, the planet's 30-year round a clock measured against the fixed stars. Because Saturn moved so deliberately and shined so steadily, it became, for the old sky watchers, the outermost boundary of the known heavens. It was the farthest of the wandering lights they could see without instruments, the last and slowest of the planets, beyond which lay only the fixed stars and mystery. For age upon age it marked the edge of the solar system as human eyes could trace it, the final lamp on the long road outward. Only much later did telescopes reveal the worlds beyond it. Until then, Saturn stood as the threshold of the dark, and its golden light, hexagon-crowned though no one yet knew it, was the farthest thing the naked eye had ever reached. Within and around the great polar storm, smaller hurricanes spin, each a vast tempest in its own right. Scattered through the polar region are lesser vortices, storms that would be monstrous by any earthly measure yet are dwarfed by the central whirl they accompany, a gathering of cyclones turning near the northern axis. Each is a true storm, with its own eye and its own spiralling clouds, and yet all of them together are merely attendants on the great hexagon and its central vortex. To know that what would be a planet-shaking superstorm on Earth is, on Saturn, merely one small member of the polar court, is to feel again the sheer scale of the place, where even the giants are minor figures. At the pole's very centre, despite all the surrounding fury of wind and storm, there is a region of comparative calm, the eye of it all. The middle of the polar vortex, like the eye of any great storm, holds air that is relatively still and clear, a quiet well at the heart of the spinning, ringed by its towering walls of cloud. There, at the top of the turning world, sits a pocket of calm encircled by the fastest winds the planet keeps, the eye of the storm holding its stillness while everything around it wheels. It is the gentlest place in all that violent machinery, the quiet centre that every spinning storm carries within itself, the calm heart of the hexagon's beating. By the time Cassini neared the end of its long mission, the northern summer had come, and the hexagon lay fully lit in gold. After 13 years in orbit, the spacecraft had watched the pole turn from the blue of winter shadow into the warm amber of summer light, the season completing its slow change before the mission's end. The hexagon that had first been glimpsed dim and bluish now glowed in full sunlight, ripened to honey, its central storm and 6 sides revealed in open colour. The timing was a quiet grace, a 13-year watch that happened to span exactly the seasonal change that turned the shape from blue to gold, the planet's long calendar and the spacecraft's brief life aligning just so, Among the last and loveliest images Cassini gathered were sweeping views straight down onto the pole, the hexagon spread out in full. From high above the north, the spacecraft looked directly down the axis of the planet and captured the whole six-sided shape at once, the jet stream walls, the rounded corners, the great central eye, all framed in a single view. These polar portraits are among the finest the mission produced. The hexagon rendered whole and clear, a geometric crown photographed from directly above, the culmination of years of patient orbit. In them the shape is unmistakable, undeniable, exactly as strange and exactly as beautiful as the first blurred glimpses had promised it would be. The spacecraft that gathered all this carried two names, joined together for a single great journey. It was called Cassini for the astronomer who long ago discovered several of Saturn's moons and the broad gap in its rings, and it bore a smaller probe named Huygens for the watcher who first understood the rings as rings and found the giant moon Titan. The two names, fixed to one craft, honoured the patient observers of centuries past whose puzzlement over the planet's strange shape had begun the long road that led, at last, to a machine circling Saturn and photographing its hexagon from above. In its years at the planet, the spacecraft circled close to 300 times, looping Saturn again and again on a great changing path. Each orbit carried it to a different vantage, now skimming near the cloud tops, now swinging wide past a moon, now climbing high above the pole to gaze down at the hexagon. Across those hundreds of loops it gathered an enormous trove of images and measurements, a portrait of the whole Saturnian system built up patiently, orbit by orbit, over more than a decade, the hexagon revisited from every angle the long mission allowed. The mission's final chapter was a daring set of dives, threaded through a place no craft had ever gone. In its last months, the spacecraft was sent again and again through the narrow gap between the planet and the inner edge of its rings, a slender lane of empty space where it could measure the planet and the rings as never before. 22 times it slipped through that gap, skimming just above the cloud tops, gathering its closest views of Saturn before the end. This was the grand finale, a closing flourish of bold passes through a region forever untouched, the spacecraft drawing nearer the hexagon's own latitudes than ever in all its years. Those closest passes returned the finest views of the hexagon ever made, the shape resolved down to fine detail. Skimming low over the northern clouds, the spacecraft caught the jet stream's edges, the swirling eddies at the corners, the small storms riding within the great shape, all rendered with a clarity the earlier higher orbits could never reach. In those last images, the hexagon gave up its texture, its fine structure, the curls and waves along its six sides laid bare. The mission ended at the peak of its seeing, the strange shape understood more closely in its final season than in all the years before. Cassini's long mission ended by design with a final plunge into Saturn itself, a gentle and deliberate close. When its fuel ran low, rather than risk the spacecraft someday drifting into one of Saturn's potentially life-bearing moons, its keepers sent it diving into the planet's atmosphere, where it streamed inward through the golden clouds and became, at the last, a part of the world it had studied for so long. It sent back data to the very end, tasting Saturn's air as it fell, before the thickening atmosphere embraced it. There was something fitting and peaceful in that ending, a faithful traveller folding at last into the planet it had come so far to know, its final act a quiet sinking into the gold. That descent carried the spacecraft down through the very kind of air the hexagon is made of, reading the planet's atmosphere from the inside as it went. In its last minutes, Cassini measured the gases it passed through, sampling directly the upper layers of the world it had circled. The composition of Saturn's air recorded first-hand as the craft sank deeper. It was the closest anything from Earth has ever come to touching the substance of the planet, a final gift of knowledge gathered in the act of farewell. The data from that plunge still teaches scientists about Saturn's atmosphere. The spacecraft's last fall turned into one more lesson about the golden world and the winds that draw its hexagon. No spacecraft watches Saturn closely now, and yet the hexagon turns on, exactly as it always has, with no one near to see it. Since Cassini's plunge, the planet has been observed only from afar, through distant telescopes, the pole and its shape left to spin unattended across the billion-kilometre gulf. But the hexagon does not need an audience. It kept its form for ages before any eye found it, and it keeps that form now, turning steadily over the pole in the long quiet between visitors, its 6 sides as true as ever, though no camera hovers near. There is a deep peace in that thought, a great geometric shape wheeling on in the dark, perfectly indifferent to whether anyone is awake to watch it. Future travellers may yet return to study it more closely, for the wonder is far from exhausted. There is talk among those who plan such journeys of sending new craft to Saturn and its moons, to probe the depths the hexagon hints at, to read the planet's interior, to sample Titan's seas and Enceladus's spray. Whenever such a mission comes, the hexagon will be there waiting, turning as it has turned through all the years between, ready to give up a little more of its secret to whatever patient eyes arrive next. The shape that has kept its form across decades will keep it across the decades to come, holding its place at the pole until the next visitor crosses the dark to find it once more. And so the picture settles into one image to carry down into sleep, a 6-sided shape, wider than the Earth, drawn in pale cloud at the top of a golden world, turning slowly in the cold and the dark more than 1 billion kilometres away. Around it, butterscotch bands. Below it, rings of ice. Within it, a great calm eye. It has been there far longer than anyone has watched, and it will be there long after this night has passed, wheeling steadily about the still point of the pole, asking nothing, keeping its quiet geometry against all the churning of the world. A hexagon of weather, serene at the crown of Saturn, holding its shape in the deep. Let that image rest in the mind a while, the great 6-sided crown turning far away, while the breath grows long and the body settles deeper into the warmth of the bed. There is nothing to hold, nothing to keep. The hexagon needs no help to go on turning, and you need do nothing at all but ease downward into rest beneath it, carried by its slow and faithful spin. The very fact that such a shape can exist at all reshapes how the mind holds the universe, gently widening it. Here is geometry where none was placed, order risen on its own from moving gas, a hexagon larger than a world drawn by nothing but wind and spin, and the deep laws of turning fluids. It is a quiet rebuke to the idea that beauty must be built, that pattern must be made. Here pattern simply happens, blooming from physics alone, no hand required. To know that the cosmos draws such figures unbidden, in places no one may ever see, is to feel how rich with hidden order the universe must be, how full of quiet symmetries turning in the dark, waiting, not for an audience, but simply because that is how things are. And here, the final wonder, the one to close the long night upon. For all its strangeness, for all the puzzle of its corners and the mystery of its depths, the hexagon is at heart a deeply peaceful thing, the gentlest possible expression of enormous forces. It is a storm, yes, and a jet stream faster than any wind on Earth, and a wave standing atop a planet of crushing pressure and bitter cold. And yet from the calm distance of space it is none of those violences. It is only a clean and quiet shape, a 6-sided figure of soft gold cloud turning slowly above the pole, beautiful and serene and utterly at ease. All that power resolved into stillness, all that speed, reading as calm, the fiercest winds in the solar system, drawing the most peaceful of shapes. There is a deep reassurance hidden in that, a sense that even the most enormous and turbulent forces can settle, in the end, into something balanced and beautiful and still. The hexagon has found its equilibrium and kept it across the ages, and tonight, far above you, beyond the dark and the cold and the billion kilometres of empty space, it is turning yet, a quiet crown of cloud on a golden world, holding perfectly to its shape while the great planet turns beneath it and the rings shine on into the night. The journey across all of that is done now. 101 wonders of a six-sided crown of cloud, gathered and laid out across the dark, and now there is nothing left to do but rest. If you are still here, drifting in the warmth, another quiet journey is already waiting for you on the screen, ready whenever you might want it, or never at all. There is no need to choose and nothing to reach for. You do not need to remember any of it. Not the numbers, not the names, not the shape of the corners or the colour of the haze. Let all of it loosen and float free. What stayed, stayed. What slipped away was only ever passing through, and that is exactly as it should be. The hexagon is still turning far away, just as it was before you ever heard of it, just as it will be long after. It needs nothing from you. It only turns, slow and steady, at the top of its golden world. Let your breath grow long now. Let it slow on its own. There is nowhere to go, nothing to hold. The day is behind you, and the great shape spins on in the dark without any help at all. Let the shoulders soften, let the hands fall open. Far above, the pale gold crown turns once more around the still point of the pole, and here, in the warmth, you can let go of even that. Rest now. Let the last of it drift away. And now, 101 wonders are resting with you. Sleep now. Good night.